Would you pray with me? Thank you, O Lord, each day for your living word. It guides, directs, and illuminates our path. Also, Lord, not only to hear it, but to do it, and to live it, and to claim it. Each day, let your word be relevant and real to strengthen and guide us each day. Amen.
Amen.
Where do I begin with this? Dane read wonderfully the gospel lesson for today, and we have two things going on. There's a couple of scenes that we can visualize. We can imagine in our minds Jesus is there teaching, and in the first scenario, he's watching all the folk in the long robes being pious and dignified and with long, loud prayers and look how holy and righteous and wonderful, and of course that's extremely disgusting to everybody. All that self-righteous piety thing is a big turn-off to all of us. It is. and it is. And it is disgusting. And it is right that Jesus makes the point that if we're going to do church, if we're going to do the religion thing, that we should be for real about it. It should be more than just show, form, and fashion. It's got to have action to it. It has to have authenticity and sincerity to it. It's more than just going through the motions. So that's a valid and important point. But today we only have a little bit of time, and I want to look at the second scenario that is being talked about in this passage, and that's the scenario of the poor widow. We have to, first of all, be mindful that in ancient cultures, ancient societies, women had no status, right? None. They were the property of their men, and their value and their worth in society was completely dependent upon the men with which they were associated. So a woman is someone's wife. That, as in Psalm 127, is bringing to bear, has to bear him lots of children. It's like and so happy is the man who has a quiver full of sons, right? And in today's context, we can appreciate, because verse 3 it says, sons are indeed a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Completely and totally dependent upon the woman folk making it happen. Right? but the woman's place in it is just a facilitator of the guy having and achieving what status is. So when a woman's husband dies, and if she also has had no sons or children, she literally becomes invisible in that society, a non-person. And that's why I'm grateful that the God that we serve, the God that helped us get the totality of the Scriptures, made sure that there were lots and lots of passages that folk that are for real about loving and serving God and about doing religion, there's lots and lots of passages that make sure that a person that's about being on God's team makes sure the widows and the orphans are taken care of. There's lots and lots of scriptures in the prophets and in the Psalms that say over and over again, don't get all pious and religious, because if you're neglecting the widows, then you're not, then all your religiosity is meaningless. All your offerings are without any kind of merit in God's eyes. You're not getting any brownie points if the orphans and the widows aren't being taken care of. Because it's the least, the lowest, the last, and the lost are the ones that God's got an eye on. God needs us to be God's hands and feet and take care of everybody in whatever socio-economic status there are. And that's why when we look at this passage of the poor widow, we honor. Okay, let me just recount the story. Jesus is sitting against. Imagine him sitting along the wall and he's watching folks put their offerings into the treasury, temple treasury, and these. A bunch of folk of probably all kinds of walk of life are coming in, and they're dropping their wads, their rolls, and so this woman comes along, and she drops the 2 copper coins in. So Jesus calls his disciples and says, what she gave was of greater value than all the people that gave of their abundance. Okay. We need to put a pin in that for a second, because one of the things that's going on in our economic crisis today is whether or not, the folk that have really high incomes, and somehow or other there is this kind of disproportionate when people of middle class or lower class are paying more into the tax system, and folk of higher income are actually able to. The systemic thing is that there are lots of loopholes and opportunities for them to put money in all kinds of places, so that out of their abundance, only this much is being taxed. So there is a disproportionate pressure upon the people that are middle and lower class. And so we've got to be mindful not to beat up on the rich folk, but we've got to recognize that there is some systemic issues. There's some systemic issues that need to be addressed to make sure that when each of us is giving, in whatever socioeconomic class we're in, that it's right, that it's fair. Right? It's got to be we got to do right by one another, whatever we are. Maybe I probably shouldn't say this, but that's why I've been a proponent of the whole flat tax concept. I mean, just whatever you make, if all you get is $2, then everybody, it's all the same. But anyway, I digress on that. So the lady and commentators ask us to look at this passage in a slightly different way. What we tend to do is we put the woman, the widow, up on this pedestal, don't we? We put her there. Oh, Jesus puts her up on this pedestal and says, wow, she gave out of her poverty. And we put her in the same category as like Mother Teresa and this 15-year-old girl. We tend to valorize people, and we put them on these pedestals, and we go like, oh wow, I wonder if I could ever someday be like that. But then in reality, nothing ever really changes. We keep on doing what we do, and having the priorities that we have, and give what we want to give, and do what. And so the commentators invite us to look at this passage in a completely different way. Rather than putting this lady up on a pedestal, recognize that he is commending her, but he is asking us to look at the coins, not at the people. Look at what is being put in the plate, and put ourselves into that position. What's getting put in the plate? You and I are what are getting put in the plate. We put yourselves in the position of the coins, and God's valuing and God's cherishing of what is being given. Did you know? Did you really realize that you give? That you and I, in reality, are the offering. So rather than focusing on the widow and how wonderful she is, let's look at what is happening in that dynamic of when someone gives out of their abundance, the value of that gift, it may have large quantitative numerical assessment in it, but what extent of faith and trust are being exemplified? Huh? Every one of us, every day,